Everyone. Thank you for taking time to attend today's cyber webinar. We encourage everyone to ask questions as we move through the presentation. You can use the field at the bottom of your screen to send us questions during the presentation. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for. If we don't get your question answered, we'll follow up with each of you at the completion of the webinar. Lastly, today's webinar will be recorded and posted to our website on our cybersecurity page. You can access that at www.iiaofillinois.org/cyber. In our previous three webinars, Avoid an Agency and Signal Disaster, Making Cybersecurity Your Agency's Priority, we discussed the personal financial exposure an agency has to a data breach. This is a very real possibility and an urgent issue which must be addressed by every agency and agency owner. We hope that through these webinars and the CE class, which we held at this year's convention, the needs of our members have been addressed, and that our agents will understand the importance of data security. The existing federal and state mandatory data privacy laws and the wording in your agency carrier contracts state that you guarantee that you will be compliant with these mandatory privacy laws, and you will pay all the costs incurred by your carrier in the event of a data breach in which you were not compliant with these laws. Will your agency exist in 5 years in the same manner and with the same profits as it does today if you do not become compliant with these laws and contract mandates? We don't think it will. As we discussed in the last webinar, the Independent Agency Council for Technology, or ACT, has determined that the potential exposure to its agency members was so severe that they developed the Agency Cyber Guide 1.0, which has now been updated to the Agency Cyber Guide 2.0. The introduction states the following: handling sensitive information is now one of the most critical responsibilities faced by the modern insurance agency. Independent insurance agents and brokers must properly collect and protect sensitive client information every day. This means they must comply with state and federal regulations with regards to privacy laws, as well as adhering to customer service best practices standards. These acts and regulations can be difficult to address given the responsibilities agents encounter daily. But as we have stated in the last three webinars, this must be a priority. As we've stated previously, to continue our webinar series on cybersecurity, we've partnered with Bill Larson of NetGen Data Security Counseling and Profit Protection Risk Management Consulting to help guide us in this process. This is the last of our 4 webinar series Bill and I will present on this subject. For those of you that attended this year's convention, I hope you enjoyed the cyber presentation. Bill has worked closely with IIABA ACT over the past 7 years and was a major contributor in developing the ACT Cyber Guide, which he presented at the National ACT meeting in Chicago. Bill is also chairman of the IIABA ACT HIPAA work group, which led the study of compliance and liability exposures associated with data privacy laws for the independent insurance agent. Bill also co-authored articles on data privacy and security for various insurance publications and worked with other associations on the topic of cybersecurity. Good morning, Bill. Can you get us started with today's cyber program?
Hey, thanks, Brian. How are we doing here? As we previously stated, compliance with both federal and state data privacy laws are mandated in each of your agency company contracts. So if your agency is non-compliant and responsible for a breach, your agency must reimburse your carrier for all losses they incur associated with that breach. So at this point, you not only could lose your agency contract and pay the costs associated with the breach, you could very possibly bankrupt yourself and your agency. So not a good position to be in. As we've discussed over the past 3 webinars, the principal law requiring agency compliance with data privacy is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. As we just said, non-compliance could lead to both you and your agency incurring an unlimited liability exposure. So in our previous webinars, we've reviewed the 12 requirements you must have in place to become compliant with GLB, and IIABA Act then developed Cyber Guide 2.0 to provide a roadmap for its members to help them to become compliant with these laws, and also to help remove the financial burden which is imposed on them by these laws. The implementation of Cyber Guide 2.0 will be the topic of today's webinar, so let's get into it. In addition to GLB, all agents doing business in Illinois must be compliant with the Illinois Personal Information Protection Act, which we previously discussed. I would very strongly suggest reading Brian's article in your Insight magazine, which began with the July article and will go through December. Brian takes each of the 12 sections of GLB and discusses them in depth. In the event you are unfortunate enough to be involved in a data breach, you will be exposed to both first and third party expenses, and the items on this page list the first party expenses you're exposed to. So as we discussed in our previous webinars, these are legal expenses, computer forensics expenses, notification and call center expenses, cyber extortion expenses, data restoration expenses, business interruption expenses, dependent business interruption expenses, fraudulent transfer of funds, and possible ID monitoring and protection expenses. So again, not where you want to be. Now, this page shows the third-party expenses you'll be exposed to. These are privacy and security related litigation expenses, which are lawsuits filed by customers or employees, regulatory fines by state or federal regulators, and payment of credit card losses. This page shows 8 of the most common types of third-party expenses to which you will be exposed. As you can see on this page, these expenses range from Social Security identity theft, tax identity theft, medical identity theft, to child identity theft.
Thanks, Bill. Could you review what an agent should be aware of when they sign their agency contracts?
Sure. As we discussed in our previous webinars, make absolutely sure that you read the indemnity clause in your contract before you sign them. As it shows on this page, your exposure is the following: unequivocal compliance with all state and federal data privacy laws. Failure to do so puts your agency in a potential breach of contract, and your agency could become liable for all claims incurred by your insurance carrier. So, as we've said in all of our webinars, the indemnification clause in an agency contract is very one-sided, as it requires your agency to hold the carrier harmless and pay all the costs associated with a data breach if it happens at your location. So it's extremely unfortunate that most agencies do not have, first, a contract with third parties as required in both GLB and the Illinois Personal Information Protection Act. Next, they don't have the correct procedural safeguards in place, nor do they have the correct compliance procedures in place to be compliant with GLB. So because of not having these procedures in place, this could place your agency in a breach of contract position. The summary of agency costs for the breaches as defined in your agency contract are as follows. First, you will pay all costs of the investigation by your carrier, then pay all costs of the required notifications by your carrier. You will pay all costs of attorney fees accrued by your carrier. You will pay all defense and liability costs accrued by your carrier, and you can pay any additional costs which are accrued by your carrier.
Thanks, Bill, for the recap of those exposures which an agency faces. They do not become compliant with both state and federal data privacy laws. Could you discuss Cyber 2.0 and how the guide can help agencies on their road to compliance?
Okay, all of the exposures to an agency and the agent, which we've discussed over the past 3 webinars, which is again why IIABA Act developed Cyber Guide 2.0 as a way for the independent agent to help mitigate the financial exposure to which these data privacy laws have placed upon them. I think what we really need to do then is let's get into Cyber Guide 2.0, discuss how to help you and your agency and use this guide to develop your compliance program. So here we go. Cyber Strategy Roadmap is the roadmap which we'll use to take you through all of the parts of Cyber Guide 2.0. Our first part of Cyber Guide 2.0 begins with a section entitled Compliance and Protection Roadmap. Now this outlines the 3 major areas which will be addressed in 2.0. First, the overriding theme of 2.0 is that the handling of sensitive information is now one of the most critical responsibilities faced by the modern insurance agency. This is specifically why 2.0 was written, as 2.0 was created for Big I agents and brokers as a guide to help them to begin their mandatory compliance process. 2.0 describes the mandatory compliance procedures required in the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and has a link to all of the current state laws that agencies must comply with. As we previously stated, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act has 12 mandatory sections which must be implemented by every insurance agency. This is a list of all 12, and what we'll do, we will review all of these requirements and how to begin your implementation of these requirements. These are listed on the bottom of page 3 under the heading 12 Steps for a More Secure Agency.
Bill, what does Cyber Guide 2.0 have to say about regulations the agency faces?
Okay, page 4 is titled Regulations, Descriptions, and Resources, and this shows a brief overview of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and these are items which we've fully reviewed in our previous webinars, and at the bottom of the page in bold print is highlighted the following. It is critical that agents and brokers first understand their cybersecurity requirements, secondly, that they begin to comply and protect data, and finally, that they follow the roadmap to fully address all areas that apply to them. And again, this is the critical information which we'll review for you as we go through 2.0 today. Now, page 5 reviews the costs and penalties for non-compliance. So we've reviewed at length these costs and penalties in our previous webinars, but this section will be greatly expanded in Cyber Guide 3.0 to include all of the information and costs and penalties which we've previously discussed with you. So as it states in the middle of the page under the title Bottom Line, non-compliance and lack of action can have profound implications on your business. Please note that profound implication is highlighted, as this will be the result if you do not become compliant, unfortunately. So at the bottom of the page, you will see a section entitled Cyber Strategy Roadmap. In this section, you will find 12 mandatory requirements of the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, beginning with risk assessment.
Bill, could you take us through those 12 steps?
Okay, risk assessment identifies hazards that could negatively impact an agency's ability to conduct business. So this helps to identify business risks and provides controls to reduce these risks. A standard risk assessment checklist should include the following 13 items. So we've got a whole list of items here we'll go through quickly. That would be to assess control of information, security awareness training, audit and accountability reporting procedures, configuration management, identification and authentication of data, incident response plan, maintenance of equipment, media protection, screen individuals who access the systems, physical protection of data, assessment of security controls, assess systems and communication protection, and assess systems and information integrity. So all this needs to be in your risk assessment when you start to do this. Now, page 6 addresses the written security policy. A security policy is a document that states in writing how a company plans to protect a company's physical and information technology assets. It must deal with your agency's operations for security governance, inventories, controls, continuity, and disaster planning and systems monitoring. This also includes internal and external mitigation policies. If you go to IIABA.org/cyber and click on the link to Cyber Guide 2.0, under the written security policy section is a link to the ACT Agency Cybersecurity Policy template. You can then log in with your Big I ID and your password to download this template. Now, please note on this, this is a large document. So your agency information must be inserted in the document, and then as it states on the cover page, you must implement all of the procedures which are included in this document. So in the event you are audited by either your insurance carrier or federal or state authorities, the first item of business will be to audit your written security program and to determine if you have implemented all of the items in your written security program. If you have not done this, you are now subject to federal and state fines and could be held in breach of contract by your insurance carrier, and you could be liable for any costs which they incur as a result of your noncompliance, including possible loss of your contract.
Bill, could you describe how to develop an incident response plan?
An incident response plan is, again, it's also on page 6 there, as stated on the slide. This requires an organized approach to addressing and managing a security breach. The goal here is to limit damage while complying with the federal and state regulations, which includes notices to customers, insurers, and third-party service providers. The aim of an incident response plan is to identify an attack, contain the damage, and then eradicate the root cause of the incident. Now, there are very specific items which must be included in an incident response plan, and they can be found in the resource section. So on page 6 also addresses staff training and monitoring. As stated on the slide, this is a critical regulation. One misstep by agency personnel can expose data due to malware, phishing, or other incursions, and staff training provides every employee with a fundamental understanding of the imminent and ongoing cyber threats and prepares your employees for such threats. This training usually consists of repetitive training, ongoing and random testing in spam, phishing, malware, ransomware, and social engineering. So please refer to the resource section to begin your training.
The next section discusses penetration and vulnerability testing. There's been a lot of confusion about this area. Could you explain this for our members?
Sure. Now, penetration testing is at least an annual practice of testing your computer to expose areas that an attacker can exploit. Now, vulnerability testing is the process that identifies the holes in your network. So this type of testing is designed to assess your security before an attacker does, and this testing simulates real-world attack scenarios, and they hope to discover and exploit the security gaps that could lead to stolen records, comprised credentials, personally identifiable information, and other such areas. This testing helps you to determine how best to protect your vital business data from future cybersecurity attacks. And we have information on these programs, or you could click on the links on the resource section for additional information. Access control protocol responds to regulations requiring restricted access to your agency's non-public information. This defines who should have access to your company's data, and authentication is a technique used to verify that someone is who they claim to be. Now, authentication isn't sufficient by itself, and additional layers needed of authorization to determine if a user should be allowed access to your data or make transactions. Now, again, this is located on the top of page 7 of 2.0, and the resource section is below to the FTC site, or again, we have the information.
Bill, I've had some questions, and there seems to be some confusion about the requirements for having a written security policy for the agency's third-party service providers.
Yeah, this is really a big deal. On page 7, it really also contains the information on a written security policy for third-party service providers. Now, as we've said before, these are written policies and procedures which are mandated of agencies in both the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and the Illinois Personal Information Protection Act. The specific problem with this is that most agencies have contract with agency management systems. Now, these laws specifically state that your agency has to have a written program in place with these companies which require very specific protection of your data. In the contracts, at least that I've reviewed, of agency management systems, there is no mention of protection of your data in the event of a data breach were to take place while the agency management system was in possession of your data. So if a breach were to take place, your agency would be liable for any and all losses which occur. This, to me, is an area in which you have absolutely no control, but in which you are absolutely responsible for all incurred losses. This, again, is specifically why the requirements are in both GLB and the Illinois law, and why this policy is mandatory for your agency. This obviously applies to all third-party service providers which have access to your private data. So please refer to the resource section for further help in developing your program in this area.
The next item is encryption. Can you help us understand when encryption needs to be used?
Encryption of non-public information is also on page 7. So this slide defines encryption and the type of information which is required to be encrypted. This specific regulation in GLB describes the need to encrypt and protect the data when it's in storage and when it is transferred between the insurance agency and its policyholders or any other third parties. The resources in this section will help you to understand how to get started and what data needs to be encrypted, and we obviously have that information if needed. At the bottom of page 7 of Cyber Guide 2.0 is the information for a Chief Information Officer. This is basically the go-to person in your organization for data security coordination now. Most small agencies will have a coordinator in this position. Some of the duties of a Chief Information Officer are as follows: cybersecurity, disaster recovery, and business continuity management, information management, information regulatory compliance, information risk management, and compliance with all data security requirements that you have in your agency. The resource section for a CIO will direct you to the definition and duties as defined by the New York Department of Financial Services.
Bill, our next item is an audit trail. What exactly is an audit trail?
Okay, an audit trail is simply an electronic trail that gives a step-by-step documented history of every transaction. So for agencies using an agency management system, this will help provide the basis of developing your program for an audit trail. So audit trails provide a chronology of an agency's transactions, and auditors can use the information to help track financial records from the ledger to the source document. So kind of like an invoice. What this does, this enables the auditors then to easily confirm that an organization is managing financial information appropriately or to find areas of non-compliance. Now, audit trails should be created in line with the findings of the risk assessment, which we did at the beginning. The resource guide for developing an audit trail is located on page 8 under Audit Trail, and has a link to NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And again, we also have information on developing an audit trail. As we've stated previously, multi-factor authentication is a security system that requires more than one method of authentication. Now, here's how it works. When you log in with your username and password, that account server is going to ask you for a second independent form of authentication. Now, before it will actually let you into the system. It is much harder to pretend you are someone you're not when you have to provide and prove who you are in two different ways. So the resource of this is also located on page 8. The procedure for disposal of non-public information refers to all information that's not publicly available. So it is often said that improper document destruction is often the downfall of a small business security. There are many avenues for disposal of this information, and the resource section for this has a link to the National Conference of State Legislatures, which then shows the data disposal laws in each and every state. So again, make sure that if you have licenses in multiple states, that you develop your program in coordination with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and the laws which specifically apply to each state in which you carry a license.
Thanks, Bill. As you've gone through the 4 webinars with us, you can see why we have partnered with Bill Larson and NetGen, and why it's imperative that you understand the information we have given you in these webinars, and that you begin to use the IIABA Cyber Guide 2.0 to begin your compliance program. Please understand that compliance is not an option. You need to begin to take steps to reduce your risk of data breach, incurring fines, losing customers, or put your company contracts at risk. We believe that NetGen is the solution for your agency with the road to agency compliance, which is laid out in their toolkit. When you fully implement this program, you will fulfill your compliance requirements both to existing laws and to the mandates in your agency contract. To view all 4 webinars, go to our cyber page. Again, that's www.iiaofil.org/cyber. You can also get your compliance toolkit information and information on our cyber liability products on that page as well. After all the information in this webinar and our previous 3, I think we have time to answer some of the questions that have come in. The first one is kind of a review question, Bill. Where can they get a copy of the Cyber Guide?
Okay, if, again, as we talked about, if we go to your website, iiaofillinois.org/cyber, there's a link on that, link in there to that. You can link on that and also go to a PDF section. So all you need to do is go there, bring that up. You have the entire Cyber Guide 2.0, and then ultimately we'll get 3.0 when it comes out.
Okay, and that link would also give them access to the template we talked about earlier, kind of the fill-in-the-blank template.
Yeah, when you go on that, what will happen is you bring up Cyber Guide 2.0, and it has a link to the template, and then again, make sure that when you go in, you have your ID and password, because you'll need that to pull the template down.
Okay. Let's see here. Another question, which is probably a pretty good one, because this person seems to have a lot of duties within the security plan. What qualifications does the Chief Information Officer need?
Well, it really depends on the size of the agency. Obviously, the larger agencies, we can find people that are schooled in this. In most cases, for our members, these are going to be smaller agencies, and you're either going to have the agency manager, or the owner is going to be the Chief Information Officer. But what the Chief Information Officer does, this is the go-to person that will coordinate all of this information. So again, remember, if something happens, there's an audit comes in, there's a need to go to a chief information officer, they will then look to see what has been in place and what the chief information officer does. So they're literally have the responsibility for the compliance in the agency.
Yeah, kind of. I think that goes hand with the chief information officer. Is the person that makes sure that your written security plan is implemented.
Exactly. So that the chief information officer is the go-to person. So again, if somebody comes in, they have an audit, it's the chief information officer. As you set it up internally with your agency, again, you'll use your chief information officer, which again, in most agencies is going to be your agency manager or agency owner probably.
Okay, great. We just went by our 30-minute mark, so any of the questions we didn't get answered, we will do some follow-up with those folks. Once again, everybody, thank you for attending today. And if you attended all four, a special thanks to you folks. So enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.